we're going to reconvene the committee meetings. We're going to start again with Finance and Personnel, which is chaired by Councilmember Roxanne Murphy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Roxanne Murphy, Chair of the Finance Committee. We have 2 agenda items today, and I am joined on this committee by Council Members Hamill and Vargas. The first agenda item is an interlocal agreement between Bellingham Public Library and Whatcom County Rural Library District for the mutual extension of borrowing privileges and services. And we have our interim Library Director, Nancy Kerr, here. Welcome. We're happy to have you, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I just wanted to, hi, Brian Heinrich, Mayor's Office. I did want to take a moment to introduce Nancy. This is, I believe, maybe almost 2 months on the job now, and we weren't able to get Nancy here prior to introduce you to her, but we're taking this opportunity with this agreement, and I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you very much. It feels like it's gone by really quickly so far. As you can see, this is the annual interlocal agreement between the Bellingham Public Library and the WCLS Library, the Whatcom Library System. There is a difference here. There is a reduction of $157,000. When that revenue was originally added to this interlocal agreement, it was because there was a large discrepancy between the amount of items that Bellingham patrons borrowed from WCLS and WCLS patrons borrowed from Bellingham. And that's no longer the case. So WCLS used to be asked to make up that difference by $157,000 in payment to Bellingham to cover that discrepancy, and now it's about equal, and actually we borrow a little bit more from them than they borrow from us. So it really wasn't fair for us to continue to ask them to cover a discrepancy that no longer exists. So that's the change in the agreement.
Committee members, any questions?
I'm going to move approval.
Okay, great. Council members, any questions? Seeing none, a motion has been made to approve the interlocal agreement between Bellingham Public Library and the Whatcom County Rural Library District. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. And we will bring this forward tonight with a positive recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next agenda item is the 2016 financial review, and we have our Finance Director, Brian Henshaw, here to deliver the news.
All right, good afternoon, Council. Brian Henshaw, Finance Department. We cleared the audience for the financial review. Thank you. So today we'll be talking about the 2016 fiscal year end. These are preliminary interim numbers from the internal financial statements. The auditors will be arriving next month, and we enjoy their company for about 3 months this summer, and we will produce the audited financial statements about the end of June. Oops, sorry, went too far. No, I didn't. Okay, we'll skip that one. So I want to start with some general economic metrics or information. This is produced by the Washington State Economic Revenue and Forecast Council. It's the state organization that will do presentation and forecasting for the state budget. I like to check in with them periodically. This is from their February 16th presentation. They're calling for continued growth, moderate growth in the U.S. economy. The Washington economy should outperform that, and they're forecasting 2 interest rate raises this year by the Fed, and most likely that'll occur this week. So we'll find out on the 15th how accurate they are in their forecast. But interest rates are trending up. On the downside, they forecast a slowing global economy, slower U.S. GDP growth, negative impact by a stronger dollar on exports, and then certainly everybody hears on the news every night uncertainty regarding the federal fiscal and trade policies, so this is adding stock market volatility. Locally, in 2016, we had good job growth. We averaged about 2,000 more jobs over 2015, so that's good for the local economy. It did take a little bit of a negative downward cycle here at the very end of the year, so the unemployment rate for Whatcom County ticked up to 6.4, still pretty low. The state is 5.1, and the U.S. Unemployment rate is 4.7, so very good on the employment front. Building permits is the next thing that I'd like to share with you. 2016, we had a slight decrease from 2015, but we still produced $189 million worth of permit valuations through the permit center. You can see that there's certainly a cyclical trend here on the construction. Back in 2007, downward through the recession and back up through 2014, 15, and 16. So continued growth, but at a slower rate. It's pretty obvious when you drive downtown and you see construction cranes. We don't have quite as many as Seattle, but there are 2 or 3 downtown. Good growth in both the residential mixed use as well as single family. You can see the mix over here. Here is 5 or more apartments, and this one is mixed use commercial residential development, single family. So good growth across the board. And the last thing I'll share with you here on economics is the investment portfolio. At the end of 2016, we had $187 million of total investments. It's up from $160 million in 2015, mainly because we took advantage of low interest rates. We did some refinancing. We paid off some debt, some interfund loans, and we're able to increase the investment portfolio. The city pools all of our reserves into one investment portfolio. So out of that $187 million, all but about $12 million of is restricted by policy or by funds or by state statute. So $12 million of unrestricted general fund designated reserves out of the $187 million. Interest rates, yield, I should say, we finally made it above 1% again. You see it was all the way back here between 2010 and 2011. We earned 1% on our money. We're up to about 1.1% for 2016. And the comparison is to the state LGIP pool and the benchmark treasury. You see on the state investment pool, this is like a money market account that the state manages for us. They earn about 0.5%, and the state, or the federal treasury, sorry, my pointer goes away, is about 0.66. So our length of investment is about 3 years out total, and so that's why we get a little bit more yield than the state and the treasury. Any questions on that so far before I switch to citywide revenues? All right. Citywide revenues, $268 million in 2016. This is an increase of about $13 million or 5% over the prior year. And I'm just going to go really quick through these major changes. On all these slides, this top line is the budget. The darker line here is 2016 and 2015. So you see we budgeted quite a bit more in intergovernmental revenue. This has to do mainly with grants tied to construction projects. So we have a large work in process, so this money will get drawn down as those construction progress proceeds. The change here was that in 2015 we also did a refinancing in the water sewer funds to take advantage of the lower interest rates. Dropping down to interfund debt, you see we took out a lot more debt this year. We refunded in early 2016, you'll recall, the PFD, Public Facility District debt. That was about $10 million, and we refinanced that, saving the city $1.3 million over the next 12 years in payments and interest. And then in utilities, both for goods and services charges for utilities, this is mainly water and sewer rates, and stormwater rates and taxes, we had an overall increase of about $4.5 million in revenue from 2016 to 2017.
Any reason why, Brian? Do you know?
On the utilities?
The taxes.
Yeah, so on the utility taxes, on the water, sewer, storm, we had rate increases on all 3 of those. And then the other utilities and taxes, sales tax and B&O tax, I'll talk about later on. Okay. So, on the expenditure side, we had a small decrease from $250 million to $244 million, about a decrease of 2%. We budgeted $317 million, so you can see a lot of that is still work that hasn't been done yet on the capital side. Capital was $26 million in 2016, where we did $43 million in 2015. So if you remember, in 2015, we had maybe too much capital construction going on all at once, both for resources, dollars, and the impacts to the community. Public Works planned and did less of that work in 2016, and some of these projects now are gearing up. So we started Holly Street earlier this year in 2017 to spread that construction out, and also they'll be doing Greenery and Laurel. So we'll talk more about that in the Public Works as we get to it. I guess that's all. On the expense side here, too, you'll see that on the revenue side, we refunded the bonds for the PFD, and on the expense side, you see that we also paid off the bonds. So that's a in and an out, net to zero, basically, on the overall impacts for the city. Quickly, I'll go through just the highlights of the major enterprise funds. On the street fund, year over year, street revenue was down $7.5 million. In 2015, we did the street light project. We borrowed $3.5 million to do that project, and that happened in 2015. So there's a decrease in 2016. Fuel taxes are about on budget, right? 2016, a small increase there. And many of these projects are, again, multi-year projects due to timing plus construction windows. So this year, on the expense side, you'll see that we have a lot budgeted in the street fund. Greenery Laurel project is the biggest one that'll be going on, but also street overlay projects and TBD projects. So those will all be happening in 2017 and beyond. All right. Water fund, similar. Decrease in revenues from $31 million down to $27.7 million. Other financing, where we originally put the 15-16 budget together, we anticipated doing a bond financing in both the water fund and sewer fund. We were able to push those out, and they were successful in getting a low interest loan instead of the bond funding. That'll show up when we draw down to do the water pretreatment plant this year and next year. We'll borrow that money in the form of a loan. And we continue the conversions from metered or unmetered to metered. This will be the last year of that project, and it'll be wrapping up in the first half of this year. Waterfront expenses, again, we have a large work in process here. The biggest project, again, is the pretreatment plant that's underway as we speak. And so this will go the other way. We did about 18% of capital projects in 2016, whereas we normally do about 30%. So we'll see that go the other way in 2017 and 2018. Debt service now is about $3 to $3.5 million in the water fund, just to keep that in mind. Sewer revenues. Sewer revenues are up about $3.3 million over 2015. It's a 15% increase. Some of that was due to rates, and we also had a large contribution here, which was the Lake Water and Sewer District paid us $2.5 million for their portion of the expansion in the wastewater treatment plant and treatment and collection. Originally, they were going to borrow that money from us and just pay us over time, but they were able to go out and get lower interest financing, and they paid us all up front. You also see the conversions here from unmetered to metered and the changes in the revenue from that. Sewer expenses. We had a small decrease in sewer overall expenses of about $1.6 million down to $19 million. Again, it's sitting here in the capital. All other categories were basically at or below budget and just slightly ahead of where we were in 2015. Debt service now in the sewer fund, we did a 30-year bond for the wastewater treatment plant, and that's about $3.6 to $4 million per year for the next 30 years. So we have a lot of debt in the sewer fund. The next project here is the Rotor Lift Station, which is under design and development now and will be constructed in the next 2 years for a replacement of that lift station. And the last one is the Stormwater Fund. In 2015, going back 2 years, we had an awful lot of capital construction for the Squalicum Creek, Padden Creek, and the regional stormwater facility. We paid for that from private contributions, other funds within the city contributions to that, so it'll be a shared facility for the stormwater facility. And then the state is converting now from just pure grants to a grant loan, and so we get a grant for, say, $1.6 million from the Department of Ecology, and then if we complete the project on time and to their specifications, they'll forgive a portion of that. So we have $1.1 million of loan and $500,000 of a grant. So that's kind of a new model from the state for financing projects. And this year, again, we're at or below budget on all the categories, and then we have a large capital backlog. And that includes capital projects as well as just maintenance projects that would fall into that capital category. Okay, so before I go into the general fund, are there any questions about the enterprise funds or anything so far? All right, so on the general fund, overall revenues increased to $75.3 million, a 3.3% increase, or $2.4 million. We had good growth in both sales tax and property tax, sales tax, B&O tax, and property tax, I should say. All four of these contribute between 17 and 20% of the general fund. We're well diversified between four major revenue streams. And then the other thing I'd point out here is intergovernmental revenue. This increase is mainly due to the new contract for services with Fire District 8 for fire services. That increased from about $200,000 to $1.4 million. And then we have an offsetting expense. So they are paying us for the 8 full-time employees that now reside in our fire department to contract back for the services in Fire District 8. Sales tax was up 5% over 15, and B&O tax was up 5.4% over 15. So that's where we had the most growth. A little more detail on sales tax. Sales tax revenue was $13.2 million. It was an increase of $600,000 over 2015. The only concerns would be in general merchandise, which has been going down for the last 3 years. I've said this before. It has to do with online shopping, Canadian shoppers, changes in shopping behaviors. So this would be your general retailers. The other one, we had a small decrease, you can see up here, is in clothing. But the other categories, by and large, construction-related, all increased. Construction was our largest here, 23% increase in construction. And I'd point out that construction, building materials, wholesale, and specialty trades are really all tied to construction. So very much concentrated on the cyclical growth of construction. Dan?
I just had a question. What was the percentage decrease on general merchandise from 15 to 16?
I'd have to get the exact percent. I don't have that, sorry. I'll get it for you and send it to you later. It's gone down for 3 years in a row, so I don't have it off the top of my head.
Thanks.
Yeah. I can get that, though. These 9 categories account for 64% of our total. So by and large, the majority of our sales tax revenue is concentrated in these things right now. Auto parts and auto sales, we follow the national trend. You probably saw this in the headlines. Car sales were up to 18 million last year on a national level. That's a big increase from the recession of below 12, so that's a benefit to us. B&O taxes would be similar distribution across these categories too. On the expense side, expenses increased $2.5 million, slightly higher than revenues, 3.5%. Salaries and benefits were the largest increases. They averaged 7% each for salaries and benefits. Some of that has to do with our retro pay that happened in both 2015 and 2016. But that is our biggest portion of the general fund. It's almost $52 million, and 72% of the general fund goes to these 2 categories, and by far increasing the most. This is just to show you expenses by department. The 2 largest departments, fire and police, public safety, account for 57% of the general fund now. Parks is $7.5 million of general fund, which is 10%. The library is the next largest one at $4.5 million, or 6%. And then non-departmental accounts for a lot of transfers between funds. This goes into the Medic One fund currently, which is $1.1 million. We transfer some money back to the water fund, also to the cemetery and capital maintenance and tech funds. So those are all inter-fund transfers from the general fund to support other projects or departments in the city. Any questions so far? And then yeah.
Is judicial excluded from public safety when you mentioned the 57% number?
Yeah. Judicial now is, it is separated out from that 57%, and it's also in non-departmental. So we manage the contract for the public defender so that they're not under the legislative branch and under the judicial branch there, so that it's a separation. So it is spread out just by our employees. So back at the end of 2014, 28 months ago, when we were developing the budget for the 15-16 biennium, sales tax revenue was only 1% in growth in 2014. So we had a pretty conservative revenue estimates for the next 2 years. This is what was approved as the budget for 2016. We had beginning reserves of $17 million. We had revenues coming in at $145 million, expenditures of $146. So we anticipated a deficit of $1.3 million, and we would have had about $16 million of general fund reserves, including designated and undesignated. I went through some of those revenue highlights already, but I'll just say that sales tax averaged 3.8 versus what I budgeted of 3% for the 2 years. B&O tax was 6.7 versus 3%, so those are the two biggest gains. We're familiar with the liquor and marijuana excise tax and profits, the changes that have happened legislatively over several years. We used to get about $1.1 million, and then it went down through legislative changes to about $600,000. It's now back up to $1.2 million, but that's over several years, 3 or 4 years. We also sold Army Street and realized $367,000 in the general fund. We did have some utility taxes that came in slightly below budget, mainly on the telephone, gas, and electricity side of utility taxes. Again, although I'll say it now, we had not much weather until recently, so over a 2-year time period, there's kind of 4 winters there, and we were under budget on all those until we'll see what happens this year. And then on the B&O side, we did have 3 substantial B&O refunds that Council was apprised of earlier. Most of this $300,000 was to one business here in town, and it goes back a long time, but we did have to refund that money for their overpayment, a correction in what they estimated and paid to the city. On the expense side, we also had some positives, I guess, in the short term. On the hearing examiner, we outsourced that starting mid-2015. So the budget had 1.5 people in it and their expenses. By outsourcing it and limiting it to a half-time employee, we now have this savings, a one-time savings of about $240,000 over the biennium. That was budgeted as expenditures. These incentives have to do with the building construction incentives for urban development in the core that planning has come to you for approval. These roll forward until they're spent or until it comes back to council, and so far they have not been taken or utilized, but there is interest in these. So I got to keep that in the budget so that we have that in the budget, and it will roll forward into the next biennium. We also approved earlier this year a purchase of a new replacement fire truck for approximately $750,000. And we are now working through the reappropriation requests from general fund departments. The requests are about $1.1 million, and we will be bringing forward the proposal. The unique part about municipal government is we continue to revise the budget all throughout the year, and for projects and contracts that are unfinished but still needed to be done, we usually roll forward that, but not necessarily all of this 1.1 million will be rolled forward into the next biennium budget. So by doing that, I'll show you the before and after. This is how 2015 and 16 came through in reality. So we started at the 17 million. We had more revenues than what we had anticipated or forecasted. We had less expenditures, so it's showing as this surplus right now. The undesignated reserve, instead of being $16 million, is about $23 million right now. And then when we roll those forward with the adjustments that we're doing to the next 2-year budget, we still have a budget deficit of $3.8 million. However, we are much better off here on the ending designated reserve. So this 12% target continues to increase. It's 12% of the expenditure number here. So this number goes up each time our budget goes up. But we still have $9 to $10 million, hopefully at the end of the next 2 years, in undesignated reserves. So I know that the mayor and the level of service conversation will be coming forward to you in the next 2 meetings. We hope to have the reappropriation information also to bring forward to you. We do have identified needs that staff is going to have some recommendations to do that with the mayor, and then those will be coming to council for your approval too in the next 2 meetings. So any questions?
Well, thank you for the update. Committee members, Councilmember Hamel, please.
I have a couple questions. What is the net on marijuana tax profit to the city?
So the last payment we got on that was about $80,000, and that's for a quarter. It was down from the quarter before, which was over $100,000. So they do have a formula based on the population and use of per capita in the areas that have legal marijuana and have retail outlets. So that's something that I'll need to monitor and see if it's going to continue down to that lower amount. They did change the tax amount, and I think that might have something to do with it.
I'm going to go Councilmember Vargas and back to you, Hamel.
Actually, I had a follow-up question on what Dan was saying, and then I'll come back. One of them was, so if we've increased our licenses locally, we've doubled them, why are we getting less income?
Yeah. Well, the tax changed from about a 75% tax to a 36% tax, I think. And so I think that that has the most to do it, but it also goes into a bigger formula on a per capita basis. So it's a little bit of a black box when it goes to the state, and then they redistribute it.
Just one more on that. So we're still getting less than we're actually supposed to be allocated. Is that correct?
I will not say, you're just talking about marijuana now because...
Cannabis, not liquor.
Yeah. I don't think there was ever a, you will get this much. We've only received 2 payments, and I can just tell you that the first one was more than the second one, and they're quarterly. So it'll come in, and I can do some more research on it, but I don't have good information on that.
So they come in quarterly, but we've only gotten 2 payments or 2...
Yeah, so far.
And it's been legal since 2014? Something doesn't seem right.
So remember that in, I want to say, near the end of 2015, when the legislature reconciled medical and recreational sales, they also, what Brian's referencing, they changed the tax structure as well. So it was supposed to be made easier, but I think we recognize it comes at a cost to local governments. That's one of the things we've been talking to the legislature about is reconciling that. So I can't speak to why we would be some time behind, although I suspect it's very complicated for the state to manage this particular industry given the banking restrictions that are on it. So
I also don't think that the legalization, they did not originally have any sharing, I don't believe. So the sharing has come out after the fact, and that's why I think we've only had 2 payments. But the best thing for me to do is do a little more research and get all that, because I'm not prepared to go any further.
Yeah, yeah, no, okay.
It's a complicated one. It's just like liquor sales and profits. I mean, the information is there and the interpretation is there, and then they kind of have to reconcile those, and one person's interpretation is not always the same as the other. But I can do a little bit more on marijuana. It's never been a lot of money for us, and I think their goal is to have it increase and share it more like the liquor profits were shared, but it isn't there yet.
Councilmember Hamel, please.
Thank you. I'm trying to get my head around the impacts of the B&O incentive for downtown new businesses downtown that was passed recently, well, I guess it was a year or so ago. And that might be oblique to this discussion, but I do want to try to have an understanding of what the net benefits were, if there were any, in terms of the relaxation.
Okay. Off the top of my head, there's been 2 or 3 businesses that have qualified for that, and they're new businesses in the urban villages, in the designated urban villages. So we can put together a report on the amount of income that may have been relieved, I can say it that way. But as a new business, that would be an estimate, not necessarily that we would have a way to say that this is what they were paying and this is what they're now paying, or the lesser of the two, because they're new businesses.
Okay. What I'm looking for is to a couple of different things: quantify the number of new businesses that benefited from this, but also the number in terms of sales tax, to see if there was a net benefit to the city.
Okay.
Councilmember Vargas, then Lilliquist.
We're thinking the same today, Dan. So my question also was about the incentives, and I was curious if we haven't used that money because there's no opportunity, or maybe we could talk about whether, as a city, we're not marketing these programs enough to incite people to use them. So
the construction ones, certainly planning needs to come back and report, but we'll work together and do both of these and come back at a future date.
thank you.
Councilmember Lilliquist, please.
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned that the City Council will be having a discussion on kind of government services, sustainability, and our levels of service. We're going to be having that during our City Council retreat. I don't know if at this point we plan to have a discussion also in a regular committee of the whole. I think we can talk about that maybe after we have a discussion at the retreat, because I think a component of that discussion probably does need to occur here and on camera and more publicly, but I don't know what component yet. I don't know if you have any ideas.
Yeah, I think it's just ongoing with Rick, and so we brought it up earlier last year, and it's ongoing, so it rolls into this as we move into the work, doing our work plans this year, making changes to those work plans, and then with the mayor and Brian bringing that forward to have more discussions on it.
Yeah, just to that point, I think we'll talk more about timelines on the 25th at the retreat in terms of when this will come back before council.
Council members, anything further? Seeing none, end of committee.
Great. Again, we'll take a brief break, then we'll come back with the Lake Watcom